Yes, it's the weekly Potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake the Attorney Maislin. We got a lot to talk about from Bengals kind of unloading from the post-game or the postseason, I guess, press conference that Zach Taylor held on Monday to some other things, including the troubles of wide receiver Jermaine Burton, the troubles of area college basketball teams we'll get into. We'll talk some college football in our Pick'em segment. And, of course, my favorite portion of the podcast, you can ask me a question on any topic. Just hit up the Xverse, hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. It doesn't have to be sports-related. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And so we always like to have the non-sports one as well. So, Rick, we got a lot to talk about. You trucked up and back from Youngstown. That's not an easy trip. A tough loss for NKU that we'll get into here in just a little bit, but I'm sure you're working a little bit on fumes after driving up and back the interstate the last couple days.
Yeah, we got in about 3 a.m. This morning, so not great, but not terrible. It would have been better if NKU had won the game, of course. But, Skinny, it's been a bad week for local sports, but I do think going into this podcast, I'm actually kind of excited about it because it feels like there are a lot of topics to talk about based off of what happened. So
there are a lot of topics.
Yeah, we'll start with the Bengals. Despite being tied with the Commanders for the NFL's longest active win streak, after winning the final 5 games of the regular season, the Bengals missed the playoffs, of course, as they didn't get everything that they needed to fall into place. They had a 9-8 record and a third-place finish in the AFC North to finish this season. But then right away, we got the news that I think a lot of people were hoping for, that they are making major changes to the staff. Zach Taylor appears to be sticking around, but the Bengals made the decision to fire defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, offensive line coach Frank Pollock, linebackers coach James Betcher, and defensive line coach Marion Hobby. Skinny, we'll start here because you and I have kind of talked about Lou Anarumo multiple times throughout the last month plus of the season about what his fate would be. And you had said multiple times, like, if you asked Lou, he would probably tell you he's going to be canned at the end of the year, kind of regardless of what happens over these final 5 games. Would you have done it? Would you have gone through with firing him?
No, I wouldn't have, but I understand the reasons for it. I mean, listen, this is a scapegoat league, right or wrong, right? If the team isn't successful, the GM, well, usually it's the head coach will fire coordinators. And then it moves upwards to, well, instead of the GM getting fired by the owner, the GM fires the head coach, and you start that cycle. Then things get really ugly. Then the GM gets fired. Problem is the Bengals don't technically have a GM, but usually that's kind of how this works. And so, yeah, maybe it is time for a different voice, a different scheme, a different lot of things. But I will say this, and I wrote a column about this, now it puts Zach Taylor squarely in the crosshairs. You made the move that, again, was the logical move that I think everybody expected. I even said I thought a couple position coaches would get whacked. But now the onus is on you. Now you're going to have another coordinator. What if the defense stinks again? What if you go 9-8 again? The onus falls squarely on you. So he's clearly put himself in the crosshairs. But I also think, to his point, he was asked very late in his press conference on Monday, do you feel a sense of urgency or pressure? I can't remember what it was. He said, I feel urgency every day. I think there's more on it now, right? I don't think you can go 3 straight years without making the playoffs. I don't think the cachet buildup is enough for that because you're not in the just make the playoffs window. You're in the get deep in the playoffs. And if you go a 3rd straight year with not even making it, well, then the onus is going to fall squarely on you. And I think he realized that listen, if I'm going down, I'm going to have to try one more thing on defense here, and let's go from there. I need a different offensive line coach. I don't think he and Frank Pollock were ever in lockstep with one another, but this is also his 3rd offensive line coach. The Jim Turner experiment failed miserably. I don't think Frank failed. I don't. I mean, he had to deal with a lot of combinations of guys, and honestly, a couple guys who really couldn't play. But again, needed a new voice. You needed new ideas, and so I understand all of that. But let's be clear here. This is just it's a scapegoat league. It always has been, always will be.
Yeah, I think we have said it multiple times throughout the course of the last few weeks that regardless of whether Lou Anarumo is the right or wrong guy for this job, he doesn't have the players to work with this season.
Right.
I mean, that was clear from very early on in the season. It continued to become more clear as the season went on. So regardless of who is going to be the new defensive coordinator, they're going to have to do some major reshaping of that defense this offseason. And quite honestly, the team playing well over the final 5 games, I'm not sure that it made it any easier to figure out who are the parts that are staying and who are the parts that need to go. So it's not going to be easy to fix this thing just because they got rid of Lou Anarumo. What would you be looking for out of the new defensive coordinator that they hire? Are there any specific traits that you like?
No. I honestly, no. I think people make this way too complex. I really do. I just don't think they have good players at the moment, and good players make all the difference in the world. If you can't, if you remember, one of the great storylines of the 2021 and 2022 defenses. And I remember writing, it was one of my favorite stories to write, was the art of the disguise in coverages and the fact of how Jesse Bates and Von Bell could really play off one another. And Mike Hilton was part of that as the slot corner. And they really all had almost kind of silent communication, knew where everybody was going. That then allows you as a coordinator to do all kinds of different things. But when you're just having guys back there and you're trying to get them to do the basics, well, then what are you scheming up? There's not much you can scheme up at that point.
Yeah, and I will readily admit, I don't know football X's and O's well enough to be talking about whether their scheme is good, whether their scheme is better than other teams. I'm just not that type of guy.
I've heard some people go, you need to go back to a traditional 4-3. Nobody plays a 4-3. You're always playing a nickel corner on the field. Wake up, people. It's 2024.
I also would say I know the longer I've been around sports. I cover college basketball very closely. I've been in lots of practices. I feel like I have a better grasp on basketball than maybe your average fan would. What you learn the longer you're around it is all of these guys knows X's and O's. That's not what separates most of them. Most of them can draw up a play, can come up with a scheme, and most schemes will work if you have the right players. And so I think that the things that make coaches really good are, one, finding the right players, getting the most out of them by making them excited about your system, believing in your system, communicating within your system. And then there also still is, I think there is a little bit of marrying your scheme and marrying what you want to do with your players' skill sets, making sure those two things combine well enough. And I think maybe sometimes that's where when people think a coach doesn't do the X's and O's well or doesn't scheme well, and this is across any sport, I think a lot of times that's what they're more so talking about is the group of players they have doesn't necessarily fit the scheme they're trying to play. So I think that's what I'd be hoping for more than anything is they get someone who's flexible, can find some guys and work with them quickly because they don't have 2 or 3 years to rebuild this thing and fix the defense. It has to be good next year.
Yeah, and that's still a big ask. I mean, you're still needing at least one safety, maybe two. I think Geno Stone did settle in a little bit. I think he kind of found himself down the stretch. Again, he also did some of his damage against some of the worst quarterbacks in the league, a bunch of backup hacks for the most part. But I did think that, I mean, you still need some help in the interior defensive line. You need an edge rusher. I'm not so sure you're not too far removed from at least one new linebacker, and maybe at some point very soon, 2 new. I mean, so there's a lot of moving pieces there to try to fix.
Yeah, I'm just curious a little bit more on the linebacker thing because we talk so much about the defensive line and the secondary. Obviously, that needs to be talked about this year. But I think there's a pretty strong argument to be made that you have to replace one of the 2 linebackers, if not both of them, right now.
Yeah, I mean, Jermaine Pratty had a great interception in the Denver game, and he is a smart football player. Don't kid yourself there. Even though we made fun of him for some of his stupid comments after the Pittsburgh game, that's the first Pittsburgh game. But he is a smart football player, and I even talked to him about that interception, and he went through the whole diagnosis of that play. That hey, it's one of their favorite plays. This is where he likes to go with it. I tried to run back there as fast as I could, and he did. He makes an interception. He made a play, but he didn't have a very good year. Logan Wilson's now coming off injury. He kind of disappeared. I don't think I saw him for the last 5 or 6 weeks after he had the whatever procedure was done on his knee. So, yeah, I do. And again, I do think there's something to be said for new voice, new ideas, new blood. I do. I think there's something to be said for that. But, again, this is just, to me, it's always been a scapegoat league, and Lou Anarumo's getting scapegoated. I get it. The one thing I will say, Rick, and you brought this up a few weeks ago, in the column one of the columns I wrote this week on the aftermath was, while I'm not sure I completely agree with this, other than it is maybe the time for fresh thing, all that, is this decision in my mind for all of these guys was made up weeks ago, and the 5-game winning streak didn't cloud that, and it shouldn't have clouded that. Now, maybe if you got in the playoffs and made a deep playoff run, then okay, that might have been able to cloud it at that point. I'll give you that. But this clearly didn't cloud it at all. And I think that's the one good thing I'll say of this is it didn't make them go, huh, well, maybe we'll try. Well, no, if you didn't like it 5 weeks ago, you shouldn't have liked it now.
That was the old Marvin Lewis mistake, right?
That's right.
They did that one time at the end with Marvin Lewis, and it was a completely wasted year the following season. And so I'm with you. I'm glad that they did not let these final 5 games impact their decision when it comes to that. But I do wonder, what happens if they snuck into the playoffs and won a game? Then do you still make this call?
Yeah, I think 1A game wouldn't have been enough. Again, I think if you march again to the championship game, maybe that. I mean, that's 3 championship games in 5 years, right or wrong.
Well,
The defense
if
would
they
have been
do
a
that,
part of
they
that.
deserve to stay, I think. I mean,
Yeah,
you
no
get to the
question.
championship
Right,
game, and the
right.
run you make with that group, then it really just becomes fix the beginning of the season, get your
That's
head out of
correct.
the ass in
Yeah,
the preseason and training camp and all of that and figure it out, because
yeah.
really that would be the only issue at that point with this coaching staff. You had a good working relationship with Lou Anarumo. I mean, it seemed very obvious from our podcast here and the stuff that you wrote that he was good to talk to. He gave you guys some stuff, and you personally seemed to get information from him and be able to talk to him well. How long does it take to build that type of trust? How difficult is it? Do you feel like, if they bring a new guy in, you'll be able to build that same type of relationship pretty quickly?
I will say this: the one thing that the Bengals have done, and it goes back to Marvin, is the availability of the coordinators at least once a week. I think is good. I think it's good for everybody. It's good for them too because they're all vying to eventually become a head coach, and part of being a head coach is dealing with the media. I'll even give Marvin credit for that because Marvin was good with that as well. And we had, in my tenure, at least recently, I mean, Hugh Jackson was the offensive coordinator, Paul Gunther was the defensive coordinator, and both those guys were great to work with as well. And so, yeah, I don't think it takes that long because to their credit, they make them available readily enough. And I think at that point, they then can read the room of who do I trust, who do I not trust, who's bugging me, who's not bugging me, who's going to ask me questions I'm going to answer, who's going to ask me questions I'm going to answer in short fashion. And so I think that it doesn't take long to build that. It really doesn't.
One of the things that came out this week, you guys got to talk to Zach Taylor after these moves were made. And one of the things that came out was how Zach Taylor was saying that he and the front office are completely synced up. They both have the same vision for the future of the Bengals, and they're completely in agreement with what needs to happen going forward. Do you think that's legit, or is that coach speak on Zach Taylor's part during a tough time?
I think that's more coach speak. I mean, Zach even admitted, because I even asked him point blank, was this your decision? And he said yes. And then somebody followed up later on with, did you run this past ownership? And that's where he talked about, listen, I talk to ownership every day. I believe that. I believe there's a relationship there of conversation. But listen, when they got to free agency and didn't part ways with money to sign a respectable defensive tackle, the last guy on the market basically was Sheldon Rankins. And suddenly it was like, got to have a body. Let's go sign Sheldon Rankins. I don't think you're in lockstep with that. I think they wanted. I know Lou Anarumo wanted a better player than Sheldon Rankins, and they just didn't do it. And so you're stuck with Sheldon Rankins, who turned out to be a turd.
Sheldon Rankins or Cordy Glenn? Who you got?
Cordy Glenn's higher than Sheldon. He's higher on the turd list.
So Sheldon Rankins was slightly better than Cordy Glenn of
Yeah,
a
yeah,
acquisition.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, my goodness gracious, that guy. I mean, I'm sorry he got whatever illness. I know what illness is. We can't report it, but I will tell you, I do know that he had that. I also believe he was cleared at some point, and I just don't think the dude. I mean, I don't think the dude loved ball. I just don't think he loved it at all. And that's fine. You don't have to love ball, but then this was literally a roll the dice. Hope the guy gives you something. Hope he becomes engaged, and he never really did, and he stunk.
How much stock do you put into Ian Rappaport's latest report on the idea of keeping Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins together in Cincinnati? He tweeted out or put out, quote, sources say the three have discussed playing together again for years to come. It's their goal, and privately they have made no secret about it. While it was assumed Higgins would depart in free agency, the goal is now to stay together, which explains some of the quotes that have come out of the building recently. Now, aside from the part that I have no idea what the hell privately they've made no secret about it
Joe
means.
Burrow publicly's made no secret about it.
Yeah, all of this seems like a word salad of a typical
Yes.
like insider
Yeah.
tweet type
Yeah.
situation, but people got excited about it because Ian Rappaport reported that this is a thing now. Do you feel like there's any more legitimacy to those guys sticking together for another year than there was maybe a month ago when we first started talking about this?
No, it became legitimate the night in Dallas where Joe Burrow talked about it. That's when it became legitimate. He
Well, and when T.
publicly,
Higgins fired his agent, right?
yeah, right. I mean that's there's no private to that, my guy. It was very public that Joe Burrow's talked about this.
Yeah, that was my reaction too. When I read this, like they're not making a secret about it in private. I'm like, well, or in public, and also if they're not making a secret in private, then what would that make it? It would seem like it would be public at that point if it's not a secret.
Correct.
Anyway, Jermaine Burton is the other story to talk about here. It was right before they left for that Steelers game. The report comes out that he's not traveling with the team, and everyone's, what the hell is going on with this guy? Then the report that he's getting evicted from his apartment at the Banks. And then after the game happens, earlier this week, we get the report that came out about He's accused of assaulting a 19-year-old girl that he was allegedly dating. The details of that situation have been reported by the Enquirer. He allegedly broke into her house, broke her phone, choked her, and held a knife to his own throat and threatened to take his life. Obviously, that's heavy stuff. Obviously, that's scary. He seems to be dealing with a lot of different things. He's also doing terrible things, allegedly, to this girl. It feels to me like the Bengals just absolutely, completely missed on a guy whose own head coach from the college ranks was on national television as he was being drafted saying, this guy has nothing but red flags, can't get himself right off the field. Obviously, he's a talented player, but good luck to the Bengals and him. And the Bengals still missed all those flags and ended up with a guy that was now a completely wasted second-round pick.
Yeah, I third-round pick, but yes.
Third-round pick, excuse me.
Still a wasted pick no matter which round it would have been in.
Yeah.
I do think that there are coaches who believe they can Father Flanagan people into being successful. And that I think this was one of the few times that Zach Taylor's done a really good job, so the scouting department, of identifying captains and drafting guys who were leaders on their team. They very rarely do this red flag thing. They took a calculated risk on this, and it was a risk, and it's backfired on them, and so they need to own that. I will say this. Kudos to the Enquirer for starters. They hustled on this. They did a records request from the police. Got it. There were no charges filed. She chose not to file charges, but there is a police report. That's where this information is coming from. That and a 911 call. So kudos to them for that. But on the human part of this, we saw this from Jermaine Burton from the outset this year. Al Michaels' comments in preseason about sleeping in meetings, and then we start getting rumblings of he's late to meetings, and he's not. Joe Burrow alluded to he needs to get his playbook a little bit more, and so.
Can I ask a question about that real quick?
Uh-huh.
The thing initially was he's missing meetings, he's late to meetings, right? Now we found out he had an apartment at the Banks.
Right. Oh, yeah.
How could he not get there? Someone couldn't go by and grab him on the way to work and bring him in? Like, he just wouldn't answer his door when they were knocking? Or what's
right.
Like, there's some lowly assistant on the staff who they made it his job just to go wake up Jermaine and get him to film every morning.
Did
it didn't happen?
No, I'm going to guess they didn't. Then, of course, we had the incident the week of the Raiders game where he was going to play. They had him in the game plan. He was going to play, and then doesn't take care of his business on the days leading up to it. And Zach Taylor has to make him inactive for that game. And I remember the next week I was the one that went up and talked to him and tried to get an answer from him in the locker room. And I think I've told this story. I don't know if I told it on the podcast, but I thought he was playing me because initially I said I'm going to go try to talk to him, and I was told he's not going to talk. I said that's fine. I'm going to ask, and he can answer however he wants to answer. Because everybody else was in with Joe Burrow during his press conference. So Jermaine kept coming to his locker, and he looked like he was searching for something. And he'd run away for a bit, and he'd come back. And I'm like, I'm getting played, but I'm going to stand here the whole time. And eventually, if he sits in his locker, I'm going to ask him a question about, what did you not do last week that kept – so he keeps fumbling around in his locker. When I say a mess, Rick, and a lot of NFL lockers are messes, this was over-the-top mess. I mean, there's clothes everywhere, stuff everywhere. And so about the third time he does it, I'm like, he is looking for something. I don't know. Maybe his car keys because once he gets them, he's going to leave the building. I don't know. Finally, there it is. He lifts up like some clothes, and you hear this, thump. It was his cell phone. He couldn't find his cell phone. And to me, I'm like, this dude. And then, of course, there was a picture of him in the pajamas at the casino. And
right after.
Then wonder, does he have a major gambling issue? If he can't pay his bills for rent or chooses not to, he obviously can't adult. So let me get to the human part of this. Somebody... And I put it on the Bengals because he's their employer at the moment, needs to find this guy some help. And so to me, while I think everybody's screaming, cut him, and I'm not going to, if they cut him, it's not going to faze me one iota, but maybe you try to get him whatever help he needs, and maybe it does snap him to attention and make him realize the opportunity that's being lost here, and maybe it fixes it. But again, because I've had people ask, why haven't they cut him yet? Well, maybe they're trying to help him. I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. Again, to me, if that's not going to be the answer to it from a human standpoint, then yeah, cut him because it's not going to change.
Well, even they can try to get him help. They still need to get him off the team because it's going to continue to be a bad PR situation. It's going to continue to be a distraction, and also you don't need to be wasting any resources or bandwidth trying to figure out what's going on with Jermaine Burton when you're at a crossroads as an organization in general.
That's a fair point.
Granted, Skinny, this is a sad story in a lot of ways. I mean, whatever Jermaine Burton's doing and doing to this girl, that's
And,
also terrible. And that's, he doesn't
yeah,
deserve any pats on the back or credit for that. But it's like clear that this guy has real major issues and trauma. And I would assume there's some type of substance abuse issues based on what was described in that police report. So there's a lot going on here. I genuinely feel bad for the guy because it seems like he's got major issues. But at the same time, he's an adult and there are consequences for these actions. And you can't be, breaking into girls' houses that you're dating, even if you're drunk or whatever, and doing
and
crazy
attacking
things
them.
like this.
Yeah, that shouldn't be condoned, no question. And attacking them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that's the place to leave it. I mean, I can't imagine there's much of a future for him with the Bengals. Like you said, maybe they try to help him out, but even then, it's hard to imagine him making the return to being a productive NFL player anytime in the near future.
No, I would agree with that.
All right, let's switch gears to the Reds here. They made a little bit of national news this week when they had a trade. They acquired second baseman, outfielder, versatile player Gavin Lux from the Dodgers on Monday in exchange for outfield prospect Mike Sirota and a competitive balance pick in the upcoming Rule 4 draft. Last season, Lux slashed .251 batting average, .320 OBP, .383 slugging, almost identical to his career averages. He hit 10 home runs, drove in 50, swiped 5 bases while striking out just below the MLB average of 22.7%. Skinny, does this trade move the needle for you?
No. I mean, great. You added a number 7 or 8 hitter in your lineup. Good for you. It gives you, I guess it does give you more potential productivity than a Santiago Espinal if Matt McClain can't play, and or now maybe the decision is to move Matt McClain to the outfield, and maybe they think that fixes the outfield bat situation because of McClain's bat. But no, I mean, you added a number 7 or 8 hitter in your lineup. Good for you. That doesn't move the needle much for me.
Here's what I don't understand. Does this not feel like a slightly better version of Jonathan India?
Yes, right. No, that's right.
What was the point of being like, we got to get rid of Jonathan India? We got this logjam. We don't really have a spot for him. He's not valuable enough. And then you get a guy that's like slightly better than him, and you're like, oh yeah, Matt McClain is still our second baseman. We might move Gavin Lux all around. It's like,
yeah,
okay, so you're getting excited about a utility player? Like,
right.
What do we do? It does nothing for me. I mean, I'm sure he might be great. I'm sure he'll play a lot of games for the Reds this year. He could have a fine role. It's not on Gavin Lux. I don't think he stinks or anything.
No.
Not every acquisition needs to be a star, but
the Reds need an acquisition.
The Reds need a difference maker. Yes. I mean, don't try to sell me this and Terry Francona and tell me that's enough to make an improvement to get into the playoff hunt next year. It's not going to be.
Yeah, no, barring CES snapping back to what you think he was going to be, Matt McClain snapping back to what he was.
Noelvi Markey going back to doing drugs.
Right. Yeah, no, right, exactly.
Performance enhancing, to be clear.
I mean, I can't imagine that you think this excites the fan base. This is going to be it. I mean, this can't be it. This just can't be it.
No, I'm with you on that. I don't think there's much more to add there, but that everyone was like, Gavin Lux, what do you think? Not much. I mean, it's okay. Yeah. It's a deal. You got a guy, but it feels like you just replaced Jonathan India, which you didn't need.
It's better than 350 at-bats from a Santiago Espinal.
Yeah, exactly. All right, college basketball, brutal week for the local teams. Who do you want to start with? Because there are a lot of losses here to talk about. Who's the most interesting one right now?
I think it has to be UC because of the thing that they were trying to talk yourself into avoiding was the 0-3, 0-4. And because the 5th game in this 5-game stretch to start is on the road, even though it's at Colorado, they're not great, but it's on the road. I mean, I even said when the schedule came out, we did this exercise in the media room, Dan Horde, myself, and Kelsey Conway. And I said, guys, there's a potential they start 0-5. And they both said, oh, I said potential. I said, when you're talking road games in that league, none of them are easy. And then it's Kansas and Arizona as your home games. 0-5, I don't think will happen, but it's in play, and now it's very much in play.
Yeah, I mean, they started 0-3. They have Kansas on Saturday at 2 p.m. in their building, but it's Kansas. They lost at Baylor 68-48, and this was kind of things were getting restless with the UC fan base. Like, oh no, is this the same thing that we've experienced the last few seasons? And then this game happened where they only scored 48 points. I feel like we're in full-blown panic mode a little bit with the UC fan base now, Skinny. It very much feels like, especially when they go on the road, but in general, really, when they play good teams, they just don't have enough offensively, even though they've made more acquisitions this year in the offseason.
Yeah, a couple of things to this. I probably got over my skis a little bit with the Xavier and Dayton wins to end non-conference. That, okay, you got a couple more feathers in your cap. You got the nemesis off your back in Xavier. Dayton was playing well. They actually aren't playing well at the moment. I think they just got beat by UMass last night, if I'm
Turns
not
out both of
mistaken.
those teams stink, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Xavier can't guard, so I think it was fool's gold about what they were able to do offensively. And suddenly now, when you've got really athletic players guarding you, you don't run great actions. You don't have anybody who can really create on their own. I mean, Jizzle can create on his own; he just doesn't finish. So he can create on his own; he just doesn't make shots or finish. And
It
so when you
feels it
go ahead,
feels like that's been a big part of this season turning into somewhat of a letdown over the last few weeks. Is Jizzle James is not becoming the star
right?
point guard leader of this team that we kind of expected as he made the jump from freshman to sophomore year. A lot of us were like, man, they need to get Day Thomas out of there and turn it over to Jizzle James. Well, they've pretty much done that. And now it's like, man, maybe Day Thomas needs a few more minutes.
And you're seeing teams just really take CMOS out of everything. In fact, I think he's so gun shy at the moment, Rick. I don't know if you recall the end of the Arizona game. They did run a good action for him with a top of the key three. He caught it with plenty of time to get his shot off, and he like hesitated because I'm going to guess in his mind he's like, "Where's the defender? He should be in my face at the moment." Oh, now he's not, and it took him a minute to think about it. And then by the time he did, it was too late because then the defender was there. And so, I think teams taking him out of the mix, Jizzle not being able to create, you get nothing from the post.
The other guy, Skinny, Dan Skillings, is one who I've always felt has the
Yep.
potential to turn into a go-to scorer at that level, maybe even be an NBA type wing with the physical tools that he has. I'm getting to the point where either the player development hasn't occurred enough for him, he hasn't made the jump, or he's just not skilled enough. And he's just not going to be skilled enough on the offensive end to get himself to the spots he needs to be. I think his ball handling lacks a little bit, and he doesn't shoot it quite well enough to ever be that consistent scorer like they need from him. Because there are games and there are moments where they go to him in late game situations, and he looks like he has the potential to be that guy for him. But man, he'll just disappear for long stretches against good teams, and that's hard to win with.
I mean, I told you this on Saturdays we were watching the game, and I actually said this, and it almost was pie in the face when I said it, is because they did, to their credit, they made a great comeback. They did it actually with the defensive end. They turned it up, and Dylan Mitchell got some open court steals, and they got some easy buckets off of defense, which they needed to do. But I think I told you, I said Arizona has 3 or 4 players better than anybody that UC has. I mean, they just did.
And I really feel like that's where they're struggling right now. And all the local teams right now, to some extent, it feels like they're competitive. But when they play some of these really good teams, especially when they go on the road, man, it doesn't feel like they ever have the best player or two on the court. It feels like the other teams have the stars.
Now, Rick, despite the fact that, again, they could start 0-5, I think I had them. I gave them the Colorado win when we got into the debate, so I think I had them at 1-4. But even after that, I still had them going 11-9 in the league. And so while it doesn't get easy. There is spots in this Big 12 schedule where you can start to find wins. And I think they'll get those wins. I still think they'll get enough wins to get in the NCAA tournament, but the opportunity for a respectable seed is eroding away loss by loss.
Yeah, and the more concerning thing, I think, is the way it's happening and the,
Yes.
oh no, this looks a lot like last year type of situation. So for the fan base, it's not just this season in a vacuum. It's the whole narrative of what's come before this, and this being another, like, oh, is this going to happen to us again? If they do miss the tournament with this group, Skinny, it's going to get pretty ugly in Clifton in
I
terms
agree
of
with
fan
that.
sentiment.
Yeah, I think the NCAA tournament is the floor for this team. I think that's what it should. That's where the bar should be set of making the tournament. That there shouldn't be an excuse for not to make the tournament. But I don't know what buttons he can push at the moment. I don't like what they do on offense. I've talked about that ad nauseum in games. I don't like their actions. And I guess it's just when they're better than other teams, yeah, they can go do whatever they want on offense. But when you're not as good or as skilled as other teams, you better find ways to get your dude some shots.
Yeah. Yep.
And then
And I mean,
the other part is when Bandego's in the game, he gives you nothing on the. I mean, literally, other than a tip dunk or a lob on occasion, he gives you nothing on the offensive end. I'm not so sure they're not better playing Day, Jizzle, Skillings, Seamoss, and Dylan Mitchell. That's my 5 in crunch time.
it's funny you say that. I said this summer when I watched Dylan Mitchell, I was wondering, is he best off as a Justin Jackson like small ball 5? Remember when Mick used Justin Jackson at the 5 and they had that great run? Now, as we've gotten into this, it appears that, Dylan Mitchell doesn't like the physicality in the way that Justin Jackson did. So I don't know that you can get by with him at the 5 for very extended stretches, but I'd be interested in seeing something different. I mean,
or you need to pressure more and try to get more out of your defense, get some points out of your defense.
that's where Dylan Mitchell is so effective. When he's able to make plays and get out in transition, he's a monster. But again, he's not skilled enough in the half court to be a consistent factor on offense.
And
So,
his free throw shooting, it's just atrocious.
yep. All right, Xavier lost to St. John's 82-72. They play at DePaul at 4 p.m. on Saturday. The loss to St. John's felt like it was a bigger loss than 10 points. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
I think it got to 20-ish at different points, but it felt like it was 15 or more for most of the game. Xavier made a run late in the first half there that got them back in the game, got it down to like 4 at halftime. Felt like a miracle, and then it quickly got back up to like 15, 18-ish point lead midway through the second half. They weren't even close to being athletic enough to compete with this St. John's team. It was 50-30 on the glass total, 22-2 in second chance points.
Yeah, 18 offensive rebounds.
Just insane. Like, those are crazy numbers, Skinny. And it was, I mean, if I was a Xavier player, it would have been embarrassing, quite honestly, to have that. The way it was happening, guys just bullying you, going right through you, jumping over the top of you and laying it over your head. I mean, it's time after time. You might get a stop on the initial shot, and then they come right back through. You get the rebound, lay it in, and it's just demoralizing, embarrassing. At a certain point, it does feel like a little bit of pride has to kick in, or you have to fight back in some way. I'm not saying you're going to win that game. I'm not saying you should have won that game, but it got ugly to a point from a physicality and effort standpoint. And even Sean Miller said after the game, like, he called out his team's effort. I think it's one thing to think we're not physical, we're not tough, we're not athletic. It's another thing to think our guys kind of quit in the second half of that game. And to be in that spot with 15 games left in your schedule, I mean, there were boos at the Centos Center.
Oh, yeah, I was there. I went with my friend. He's a season ticket holder. He sits about 3 rows in the upper deck behind the visiting team's bench, that side of it. I love the vantage point. And I did say after the lineups were introduced, and I think Xavier was still crowded around Sean Miller and the 5 for St. John's go strolling out on the floor as a group. I turned my way, I go, that's some grown-ass men right there. That's literally some grown-ass men. It feels like they're playing like this is like the prep school playing the JV of somebody from somewhere else. I mean, it had that appearance to it. I mean,
Or you know what it kind of feels like? High major teams when they schedule mid-major bye games. I mean, that's kind of what Xavier looks like right now, is a mid-major team. They look that way physically, and it's a tough way to win in the Big East.
All right, so let me ask you this. Sean Miller's got a lot of skins on the wall, and he deserves to be considered a good coach. But he's also a stubborn coach. And Rick, I get what your answer to this is going to be because of the rebounding situation, but they give up so many straight line drives. It's almost like it's a layup line for teams. And when it's not, to your point, a guy tries to block a shot, he's out of rebound position, and here comes another dude crashing the glass. Why is he so reticent to play zone? Is it an affront to his manhood?
Skinny, I quite honestly, I don't understand why any coaches are so married to their philosophies and their schemes.
They don't even play pack line anymore, Rick.
Well, and not real. I mean, they kind of still have the same principles, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's had to change because the game has changed so much. A pack line defense does not work in 2024. You have to modify it just to make it kind of retroactively fit what's going on now. And it's still, like, to your point, it doesn't. I don't, especially when you're in a situation like Xavier is right now, where the season is clearly spiraling. You are not going to get in that large bid anyways. What is the harm in trying something else?
Especially against that team that came in shooting 30.9% from 3 and they were 2 of 20. What were they, 2 of 20 in that game?
And I fully realize, I completely agree with the idea that, hey, it's probably not going to help your rebounding, and it might even turn uglier, right? Like, they might hit a couple threes all of a sudden because you're in a zone. You don't practice it as much. They might get a couple more tip ducks. Guess what? It doesn't matter. You're already getting blown out on the road. Your season is spiraling. You don't have an at-large bid. I mean, I remember the one year where Chris Mack switched to the 1-3-1, went away from the pack line, went to the 1-3-1, and it sparked their season again. It got them going, and they made their way into the tournament when it looked like things might, Matt Stainbrook's knee was bothering him. He was struggling midway through the season. They were losing games. Like, they might not make the tournament this year. That turned it around. I'm not saying this team is talented enough to turn it around. I'm not saying a zone would work, but I know fans, that's always their first instinct. It's like, play a different defense, throw a zone out there. That's too much for me. But Xavier's in a different spot now. I mean, they've lost a lot of games. Things are not going well. They need anything to get this season going right again, whether that's, I don't think putting Jerome Hunter in the starting lineup is a real shakeup. I don't think that's really changing how they look much or how they're playing. I think you have to do something drastically different in a season like this where what you're doing clearly isn't working at all, and you probably don't even have the players to win in this conference this year.
Yeah, and I don't think you've got enough offense to win games 82-80. I just don't. I mean,
Yeah, especially with the way you're playing right now. I mean, they're not even playing that up-tempo, getting a bunch of shots off style. And I understand that because they've got a short bench right now, and they're kind of depleted. But it's like if that wasn't what you're going to do anyway with this group, is fly up and down the court, shoot a bunch of threes, and spray the ball around, then it feels like you have to make some changes holistically, and that just hasn't come. And Sean Miller isn't the only coach like that. A lot of coaches are very much into that, like, do what we do, we stick to what we do, we'll get better at it over the course of the year. I fully understand that. I just think we're past that point with this team.
Yeah, and honestly, to your point, I mean, that just from the eyeball test, that looked like far worse than a 10-point loss you took. That looked like an ass whipping.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a point where people are going to start asking questions, and we're going to start doing the, like, what moves do you make for next season already? And Skinny, we're like midway through the season.
Right.
We've got a couple months still to go before we actually get to that point. So it's tough. And I mean, I really do think Xavier is in an interesting spot right now because Sean Miller is a good coach. And you cannot talk about what's happened to Xavier over the last 2 years and not mention the major injuries they've had in the front court before the season. To say like Sean Miller has just completely lost his touch, while not mentioning that they've had major injuries in their front court each of the last 2 seasons to guys they expected to start, is disingenuous. But at the same time, I mean, you can obviously make the argument that the only thing this staff has done is get to a Sweet 16 with Travis Steele's recruited team. So there are some real questions about how do you move forward? What's next for this group? And how does this staff improve their current way of building a roster? And I don't think anyone has the actual answers to that right now, including the staff.
Yeah, that's a tough spot. I guess the stubbornness is what bothers me. And listen, there's nobody more stubborn than me. If you'd have told me 8 years ago I'd be coaching a team that plays some matchup zone, I'd have said, no, yeah, I won't coach. No, it's just I've adapted. The thing I fear in every game we go into, literally when I watch tape, is, oh gosh, they're going to take straight line drives and we can't guard it. Well, we're going to take at least that part away. And maybe they do make some shots, and if they do, I'm going to have to tip my cap. But I think, I don't know, again, I get it. You want to be this tough, gritty, we're going to guard you man to man, and we're going to, well, they can't. They don't. They're not good enough.
Yeah. And again, I think fans are way too early to hit that button and be like, change your defense, change your scheme, do something different. That's not how sports work at this level. But again, we're midway through the season, and your season's becoming a lost year. Yeah. So at this point, it's kind of like, do anything to mix it up, in my opinion. But what do I know? Start Brad Colbert. Absolutely not. That is one thing that I will tell you I'm completely against. Number 6, Kentucky lost at Georgia 82-69. They play at number 14, Mississippi State at 8:30 on Saturday. It's funny because they get the big win over nationally ranked Florida. Then they turn around, they lose in embarrassing fashion at Georgia, and Florida gets a massive win against Tennessee. The SEC is just going to be a bloodbath, it feels like, Skinny. I think any win you get on the road is gravy. I swear to God I do. I just think it's gravy. Push you ahead in this league, right? That's right. No, that's right. It's like that is gold. That is what's going to push you ahead. And then the flip side is you need to hold serve at home. That was a big hold serve for Kentucky. Huge. And while it's a little bit alarming that you turn around to a Georgia and lose and lose in the fashion you did because you don't score, I'm just telling you, man, you better just buckle it up, folks, for if you're a Kentucky fan, because there's going to be more. Here's the flip side. Could you go steal one at Mississippi State? You could. You could also be 1-2 coming back home from Mississippi State. And I would go, yeah, that's kind of where we're at with this league and with this team. And then right after that, you get Texas A&M and Alabama at home. 2 teams that are ranked top 15. But I go back to, hold serve, right? You hold serve there. Those are 2 feather in your cap wins. For sure. The thing about Kentucky that's been interesting is they have a win over Duke, number 1 Ken Pom team Duke on a neutral floor. They have a win, a semi-away game, I guess you would say, over Gonzaga. They have the win over Florida now. They have won these big marquee matchups where you're like, oh, how's this going to go for this team? But then they have the losses to those teams that are seemingly just a bit behind. I mean, granted, like people are acting like Clemson or Georgia are bad losses or something. Clemson's like 12-3, aren't they? 11-3? Yeah, and they're 34 in Ken Pom, right? Yeah. That's not a game that you're supposed to win on the road. Ohio State. The ugliness of Ohio State was bad. Ohio State, again, is 30th in Ken Pom. So it's like not a great loss on a neutral floor. But I guess my question to you, Skitty, is what would you rather have? Like if you're a Kentucky fan, would you rather have, with your new coach, a team that's winning the big games and dropping some along the way that maybe you feel like he shouldn't? Or would you rather have the coach who feels like he wins all the games he's supposed to, but he doesn't win any of the big ones, and you're 0-3 against the Dukes, Gonzagas, and Floridas of the world? Yeah, and let me tell you, this team's going to probably finish with
7, 8 losses in the league. I mean, maybe I could argue 9 if chips fall where they may. I
Ken
mean, this
Pom
could
has
be.
them projected right now to go 9-9 in conference play, believe it or not.
I can see that, Rick. And so even with 10 losses, in my opinion, I think it's still because of some of the marquee wins they have and will probably still get, like high-level quad one wins. I think they're still at worst a 4 seed.
Skinny, just looking at the rest of their schedule, too, it is crazy because you have a game at home against South Carolina, who's 81 in Ken Pom, and you have a game at home against LSU, who's number 69 in Ken Pom. That's your second last game against LSU. Aside from that, there's not a game against an opponent that's outside the top 50 in Ken Pom, home or away.
That's crazy.
I mean, that is just a brutal schedule for this Kentucky team, and everyone in the SEC is facing that this year. So, like you said, a record of 9-9 or 10-8 in conference play isn't going to seem crazy this year. You might still be right at the top of the conference. It feels like there's going to be so many teams bunched up there right below Auburn. Auburn seems to be the best, but then everybody else is kind of battling it out for that next tier.
And listen, this is a good collection of talent. I don't think it's a great collection of talent. And much like you see, who is the guy? We've talked about the whole thing. Who's the guy? Who go get you a bucket when you need a bucket? I mean,
Jackson Robinson fades in some of these games on the road.
He's been disappointing. I'll be honest with you. And maybe he is what he is. Maybe that's why he was a sixth man at BYU, and that's what a role that Jackson Robinson has. And we expected too much of Jackson Robinson. Could Otega Oweh be the guy? Yeah, I think he could be the guy, but he's not enough.
He seems to be the most consistent, but it also seems pretty clear he's a number 2 at best.
Right.
Like, he's not a go-to scorer. He's supposed to be more of an all-around athlete.
And listen, this is a team that is literally, it's a share the ball offense. It's why you got 6 dudes averaging in double figures, and it's probably always going to be that way. But I think that's where on the road, occasionally you got to have a guy to stop a run by going and getting a bucket. He goes and gets his for you guys. And I just don't think they have that guy.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it.
They're never going to get enough stops. I mean, it's
not
limited defensively.
Also, Skinny, the lack of toughness on the glass in this game.
Yeah, they're terrible.
I mean, what was it? 20 offensive rebounds or something that they gave up to, or 15 offense? I mean, it was like almost as bad as
nothing new. Yeah, this is nothing new. They've been terrible on the glass all year.
Yeah, and every time they go on the road, it's like that lack of physicality, the lack of rebounding really seems to show up. And it's also, I know this is what the UK fans really want to talk about, is that you don't get as many calls when you're on the road, and all of a sudden it's like your team isn't physical to begin with. They don't do a good job of getting to the free throw line to begin with. You go on the road, you get a few less calls, or a few calls don't go your way. And it's like, man, it just seems like things start to become really difficult for this UK team when they're not playing at Rupp Arena.
And it is going to be funny. I mean, March is going to define this because of the marches of the last few years, because of Cal's teams flaming out with seeds. And you could see this team making a really good run to whatever level you think it can get to. And you can see this team playing a tough matchup in round 1 and flaming out as a 5-12 game.
Yeah, right now, I think Kentucky is the team I'm most interested locally to watch going forward, because it feels like they have a chance to still be really good. But at the same time, I could see this thing fizzling down the stretch without a doubt. I think Xavier maybe has the most interesting situation overall right now, just because it's like, what do you do if you're Xavier? Like, I don't think anyone feels really good about the spot they're in currently, but also you'd be crazy if you're like, we need to move on from Sean Miller and go in a different direction right now. Also, what is Sean Miller thinking about all this? Is he one of these old school coaches who is thinking this new NIL and transfer portal stuff isn't for me? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to assess what's going to happen with Xavier going forward. It doesn't feel like there's a clear path for next year or beyond. And so there's really some interesting situations with all 3 of these teams, but that's sort of, I think Kentucky's the most interesting team this year, and Xavier's kind of the most interesting overall situation.
When's the Xavier documentary drop?
Well, that's the other thing. They've got that going on. The most recent episode just came out this past Tuesday.
Okay, yep.
And that's like, how does it look the rest of the way if things continue to get bad? What does that documentary turn into? So it's going to be interesting. We'll wrap it up with NKU. They lost at Youngstown State 72-61 after the big 2-1 week that we talked about last week. They host Oakland at 6 p.m. on Saturday. Youngstown State is now 6-1 atop the conference after that win. Cleveland State is 5-1 in second. Purdue-Fort Wayne is 5-2 in third, and then Milwaukee and NKU are both tied in fourth at 4-2. Everybody else in the conference has a losing record, so it feels like we now have 2 tiers to the Horizon League. It's a top half of the league, which doesn't feel like it has much separation at all. You can give it to Youngstown State for right now because they've earned that.
But they still got to come back to Highland Heights.
And I've learned the last 2 years, like NKU goes to Youngstown State, and it's ugly and they get smacked around, you think, oh, that's not a good omen for the rest of the season. And then, the game at Highland Heights is a win for NKU, and that game is never thought of again. I mean, 2 years ago, NKU got smacked around up there, and then they beat them in Highland Heights and beat them in the conference tournament. So I feel like that game is usually meaningless. It just seems like a hard place for them to play. And I also think Youngstown State has kind of made part of their identity beating NKU or catching NKU. They've gone after NKU guys in the transfer portal consistently. There's been a lot of they tried to use the NKU matchup zone last year when Jared Calhoun was still there. So there's been a lot of taking from the NKU program and trying to be more like NKU. I think they take a lot of pride in beating them when they come up there.
Well, they're coached by a former NKU point guard now, and Ethan Faulkner. So there you go.
Exactly. I mean, he's doing a great job. They really defend well. They switched it up. So
well,
I'm impressed.
Having a 7-3 shot blocker doesn't hurt.
Gabe Dines from Simon Kent in Independence, Kentucky, a local guy who ended up at Youngstown State, was not heavily recruited in high school at all. Nope. And that's why he ended up at Youngstown State. He has made a massive leap from freshman to sophomore year. Last year, he could block shots, but I thought he was easier to exploit. Sure. When he came into the game, it was like, okay, yeah, he'll block a shot or two, but you're going to get 3 or 4 baskets just on exploiting his lack of mobility and toughness. This year, he completely changed the game when he checked in. It was an up and down, high-scoring affair for the first 5 minutes. He checked in and completely changed the complexion of the game by shutting down NKU's offense. Because at that point, with a shot blocker like him at the rim, they can really take away the three-point shots and expand on the perimeter, and that's what they do.
Yeah, I think does he lead the nation in blocks?
Yeah, he leads the entire country in block shots. He's averaging over 3 per game right now. Has, I think, 54 after last night. Yeah. Any other thoughts on NKU or the path ahead for them, Skinny?
No, to your point, I mean, this feels like a lot of those top-tier teams. I guess the separator will be who can sweep 1 or 2 of those teams, right? Because I think it feels like they're all going to hold serve at home.
Yep, exactly. All right, let's get into our pick'em segment. We'll also talk about the college football playoff games that we have coming up while we sort of break them down and give you our picks. Last week, you went 2-0, and I went 1-1 on the Bengals game. We both had the Bengals. They covered. You had the under. I had the over.
I think I went 4-0 technically because you got to go back to the Georgia Notre Dame. I think we picked the week before.
Well, correct. So I added that score on to last week as well.
Gotcha.
I'd already done that retroactively to last week's record. So that bumped you up. And then with this, you gained another pick here with the 2-0 versus 1-1. So we are now tied again. 66-54 exactly with 3 games left to go. We've got the 2 semifinal game and the national championship game. The Bengals are done. So that's it for them. So it starts tonight as we're recording this on Thursday. Thursday at 7:30, we've got the Notre Dame Penn State semifinal matchup. Notre Dame is a 1.5-point favorite. The total is 45.5.
Yeah, I'm going to go Notre Dame 23-16. So Notre Dame in the under for me.
All right, that's not good for the pick'em's sake because I have Notre Dame 24, Penn State 18. Both of us are on Notre Dame in the under.
That's okay.
But break this one down for me, Skinny. What I see is just a defense that I'm betting on right now. More than anything, I just feel like Notre Dame's defense is awesome.
Yep, and listen, I think Drew Aller's underrated because I just don't like their passing offense, but he does make some plays. I'll take Riley Leonard. He's a better quarterback in my opinion, and he can do. Aller does some things with his legs too, but Riley Leonard I think is just a better quarterback.
Yeah, are you thinking this is going to be like? Are you looking forward to this game or the Ohio State Texas game more?
Both. Oh, both for sure. Yeah. Both.
Friday at 7:30, you've got the Ohio State at Texas game. Ohio State is a 5.5-point favorite. The total is 53.5.
Yeah, I mean, the steamroll continues. I'll go Buckeyes 34-20.
34-20?
Yeah.
Wow, so that is Ohio State and the over by a 0.5 point. I'm going to go Ohio State 28, Texas 17. I think this is going to be a defense-dominated game, too. I think that's what Texas honestly wants at this point. And Ohio State's defense has been fantastic so far in the playoffs. I'm going under in both of these matchups. So 28-17 for me, OSU in the under.
Yep, our one difference maker is the total in that game.
Yep, that's what's going to come down to for this week, and then we have the championship.
Yep.
No point in a best bet because there's nothing else really going on. I guess if you had an NFL pick that you really liked coming up.
I haven't even looked at numbers in those yet, to be honest with you. I really haven't.
I haven't either. All right, so
I take back. I will. I think Buffalo just whitewashes Denver. I think they're a 9-point favorite. I think Buffalo wins that by 3 touchdowns.
All right, fair enough. Ask Skinny anything. Skinny, if you had to do it all over again, would you still choose to be in the media business, or do you think you would have made it as a coach?
I think I would have made it as a coach. That was something I wanted to go into at one point teach and coach, and I chose a different path. I get the best of both worlds now because I really do. I love coaching. I've said this. I still remember interviewing Ed Thompson, who was the athletic director at NKU back in the late '80s. He had just gotten the job. I was working for a weekly newspaper, and he was a former coach at Austin Peay and a couple other like OVC schools. And I remember a question I asked him about, what do you miss about coaching? And he said, I miss practice. I love everything about practice. And I'm like, but nobody likes practice. Man, dude, I love practice. I love walking in the gym, the energy of practice, the ability to teach. Just, I don't know. I love practice. I love games too. You can't not like games. But I at the time, I'm like 20 whatever years old thinking, who like practice? Nobody likes practice. I love practice. So yeah, I would have done the coaching tree route, and I think I'd have made it.
Okay, so this is along those same lines then, actually, this question. Would you wear a jacket and tie, or would you wear team gear to coach?
So this is so good. I'm glad this question brought up because the other night it took me aback when I'm watching Rick Pitino and his staff come out, and Pitino's in a 3/4 zip and slacks and whatever. And I'm like, dude, he was like the dapper Don of coaches with the way he dressed. And I can remember on Saturday watching the UC game. I was in my hotel room in Pittsburgh before we went to the game, and I was flipping through channels during a commercial and came upon UCLA was playing. And I'm like, well, Mick's still wearing a 3-piece suit. And I actually was talking to Paul Daner Jr. about this. I guess I have not read the story yet. The Athletic's done. They just did a story on the handful of coaches who are left wearing ties. Yeah, I'm give me the 100% 3/4 zip slacks. We've done it once this year. It was one of those Saturday showcase games where we actually wore travel gear, really nice travel gear. We all wore the same. We all ordered the same stuff and wore tennis shoes with the travel gear. I'm not a big. I do this actually professionally sometimes. I'll wear the gray tennis shoes with gray slacks and a pullover, but I always coach in dress shoes. So I was kind of like Pitino was dressed about the way I would dress with a decent pair of slacks, good shoes if you will, and a quarter zip. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought you would say. Would you look better in a jacket and tie or a quarter zip?
Probably in a jacket and tie. I don't do it much, and occasionally I'll put one of those on and go, hey, that looks pretty good, my guy. That's okay looking. But
look in the mirror and say, hey,
yeah, it's not
pretty fresh there, Richie.
Looking okay, my guy. But no, I'm with you. I'm comfort over substance in that regard.
I'm with you. If they told you had to wear a jacket and tie, would you quit?
No, I'd do it. I'd wear it. I'd wear it. I'm really fascinated to read that athletic story because I'm trying to think of the coaches that still do it. Can you think of any?
I'll tell you, it's the coaches that feel like they need to overcompensate for something. If they're really short, if they can't win, if they haven't had enough tournament success, those are usually the guys who still wear the suits.
Mick is really short, but he's had success.
But there's no one who overcompensates more. Did you hear his press conference the other night?
Oh,
I've had 500 wins. I don't need to do anything else.
I sure did. No, that's the speech. I when I was a head freshman coach, and now I'm an assistant varsity coach. When I was a head freshman coach, I had my once-a-year speech I would give after you lose, usually because it's freshman, right? You usually would lose one ugly game that you had no business losing. It just did. And that would be the time I'd come in with my bag and sail it across the room and tell them, why do I care about this more than you care? I didn't go to school here. You do. And I'm reading mixed quotes. I'm like, yep, that's the speech. All right. There it is. Right out of speech 101.
Yeah, but it's every coach has that speech, right? One, usually it happens in the locker room, not in the press conference. It's okay if it does happen in the press conference. Two, the rest of them don't seem to throw in all the things about themselves the way Mick does. He's the overcompensation king. Like, no one else has to remind everyone that they almost have 500 wins before they're 50 and they don't need to do more. Like, they can just say their players are soft. That's enough for us. Don't remind about how big you are, Mick. Yeah, you're almost 6 foot. We know.
I'm gonna guess he finally hit wit's end, which sometimes happens.
Yeah, well, he's typically right on the edge of it to begin with.
But I'm just trying to think of any other coaches that do it. I mean, Jay Wright always. Now listen, Jay Wright was Mr. Style to me. That dude, he's one of those guys who has, certain guys just the body just it's perfect for a suit, man.
GQJ, yeah.
Yeah, I mean he was GQJ, but he was coaching in a quarter zip at the end, wasn't he?
That really ruined a lot of people when he came out in the quarter zip. People were like, "What is he doing with these $2,500 suits in his closet?" And now he's in quarter zip. So
yeah,
I do wonder the guys who spent all the money on the really nice suits,
right?
They probably felt pretty dumb or annoyed when it went to quarter zips. The guys like Chris Mack who were just wearing oversized Men's Warehouse stuff, Like they're like, yeah, bring it on. Like I'm good with that. Although I do know he went back to, I think, like a suit jacket, sports coat or whatever, like a suit look with no tie.
Yeah, I don't like that look. I don't know why I don't like that look as a I mean, if you're gonna go casual, let's just go fully casual and put the zip on.
I agree with that. But in general in life, I'm never a tie guy. My neck's just too big. I'll never tie.
I guess I haven't watched many St. John's games this year because I was just taken aback when I saw him. Like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, I feel like Patino bounces around. He's kind of always making statements. Like, if there's like a sweater to wear in honor of somebody or whatever, he's always doing that stuff. So
Ed Cooley didn't look good in the tie.
No, he's another guy with a fat neck. You can't tie fat necks.
That's a good point.
I have sympathy for that. Shoveling the driveway, scraping ice off your car, losing power, driving on icy roads, or wet socks from stepping in snow. Which is the most annoying of these cold weather bugaboos?
I would say if you lost power for any extended period of time, that would be the one for me. I mean, your entertainment devices are gone. You're worried about food spoiling. Your heat's not on for a period of time. Again, if I lose power for an hour, okay, I can cope with that.
If you take that one off the list, because I feel like that one's like more severe than the rest. Pretty significant.
Correct. I'll go driving on icy roads. I've only had it happen to me once where I lost really complete control when I was at the mercy of the gods, and the spin out actually occurred where I spun back straight ahead and went on with my merry way. When you're totally at the mercy of what that car. Did you see the dude jump out of the car? Did you see the video of that?
Yeah.
Oh my word.
That was local. Where did that happen at? What exit was that?
Yeah, I can't remember, but yeah, it was. But it was like, wow. But dude, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can do the steer into it and all those things, but at that point, when you're at the mercy of the slide, you got no chance, man. That's the worst for me.
Yeah. Although, like, if that happens, it is the worst. But I'd also say I am 100% the guy that when it gets bad and everyone else is like, I'm not going out, I'm like, perfect. No one's on the roads. I've got four-wheel drive now. Like, I love driving the snow because no one's out there and it's easy to get around.
The snow's fine. The snow to ice. The ice is the one.
Right. And it's kind of like you never really know until you're on it. You know what I mean? That's the problem with icy roads is you find out too late, and then that is not fun. But yeah, I don't mind driving in bad weather. Typically, I'll tell you the one I really hate that's most annoying. It's probably the easiest one of the group is scraping ice off your car.
Yeah, no. In fact, the other. So real quick, I'll get you the shoveling story. So I don't think you've been to I have a huge driveway that goes around to the back, and the garage is in the back. And if it was just the powdery snow, I would have done the whole driveway myself. The fact that the snow plow. So Sunday I drove back from Pittsburgh. We all slept 2 hours, got up at the crack of dawn, and we were all coming back to try to beat the snowstorm, which we all did, which was good. That was the good part. We actually texted with each other at one point. It felt like the old gumball rally, like, what exit are you at? What exit are you at? What mile mark are you at? And we were all within like 30 miles of one another, which was kind of funny. So anyway, got back just in time. And at that point, I'm not going out. I'm exhausted as it is. I wanted to watch the 4 o'clock games. I had 2 stories to write. So I'm like, I'm going to let the snow happen, and we'll see what happens Monday. Well, then Monday comes, and it got busy because of the Bengals stuff. And by the time I got done working, it was like 7 o'clock at night. Couldn't shovel in. So Tuesday, I'm like, I got to get at least part of the drive. So we put both of our cars up. That was a smart thing in case we had to get out there at the top of the driveway, the very front part. But to go out and clean off our cars, it took me at least an hour and a half a car to get all the snow and ice off of it. Then I shoveled where the plow had put the stuff. So I now have a very nice landing area. I only have about half my driveway done. The rest of it won't get done. It's going to get done when it gets warm and rains and melts it. That's literally when it's going to get done at this point.
Hell yeah.
But I scraped all the stuff. So the next day my wife had to drive into work. And so she said, will you go start my car? Yeah, go start the car for her, let it get warmed up. Because I had to move my car. My car was in front of her. And she goes, did you not scrape the one side mirror? I'm like, oh, I guess not. And to me, to your point, there is nothing worse than when that ice is like caked on it. It's hard to get that stuff scraped. It really is.
It's hard. And here's the differentiator for me. Like going out and shoveling the snow, I'm planning to do that. I'm gearing up for it mentally.
But this snow was heavy, man. Woo.
I'm putting my earphones in. I'm bundled up. I'm going out there with the intention of like battling the snow. I'm ready for battle. The problem is scraping your car is like, I'm trying to get out the door and get somewhere and I'm dressed ready to go. I don't want to be wet. I don't want to be cold. And then it's like, shoot, I have to do this quickly before I leave. And then so it just ruins your whole day. It makes you in a bad spot there right before you go do whatever you're trying to do. It's
so
terrible.
I did totally miss the mirror. There's no doubt about that. I got the one side mirror, and I guess I just didn't even look at the other one. So what I did was I started both. Once I got all the snow off of it, and trust me, it took a while to get all that snow and crap off of it. I scraped a little bit of it. Then I turned the heater on in the car, turned the rear defroster on, and let Mother Nature do some of that. And then
Keith, you're supposed to do that first. You get in the car and turn it on, it starts melting that thing for you. It's not as hard to scrape then if you got the defroster going.
I wanted to get it was so snow packed. I wanted to at least get all that crap, the heavy crap off of it before I tried it.
All right. I'm just trying to help you out. But
I'm
all right, well,
you. But I will tell you, dude, that's one of the worst snow shoveling jobs I think I've ever had. That snow was just heavy.
mine wasn't as bad as yours for some reason. I did both my parents and mine the night before I left for Youngstown, and it was a lot, but it wasn't as heavy as yours. It doesn't sound like, because mine was mostly. I mean, there was a little bit of that ice that started to form on the top, but most of it underneath felt pretty light for me. I was able to get underneath of it. So,
Not me. My elbows are paying it.
and let's not forget, this podcast knows well that you've gone through some elbow trauma this year.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, they're feeling it.
yeah. We'll wrap it up with this. What's the best food or beverage to consume during a snow day?
Oh, bourbon, man. Just get you some bourbon and go. I mean, just get your fire going with a glass of bourbon. And like Sunday, honestly, that's what I sat here watching the football games, the 4 o'clocks. Get ready to write my Bengals playoff story. I'd already written my Jamar Chase record story, and all I had to do was plug some numbers in when Justin Jefferson was done. I just sat back and did that. Had that in a nice big bowl of chowder. It was perfect.
Do you have a fireplace?
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a need for the next house. When we move to the next house, it's got to have a real fireplace. I'm a fireplace
sure.
guy.
Oh, I am too.
Yeah. That's all we got.
All right, good stuff. Appreciate the questions. Thanks for watching and listening. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by